welcome to a conversation about Ukraine. I'd like to begin by discussing an article that was published this week. It is titled, "Ukraine Sure Doesn't Look Like a Democracy Anymore," and it is by Michael Gefeller and David H. Rundle. It was published on November 17th in Newsweek. The article begins by emphasizing the cost of the war, both in Ukrainian lives and American money. And then I'm going to quote from the article here. The fact that so many such parties, opposition parties, ever existed says something about the level of opposition faced by the Ukrainian nationalist government that came to power after the 2014 revolution. Now, I'd like to note here that the nationalist government that came to power in the 2014 revolution was in fact soundly defeated by the party and government of Volodymyr Zelensky in the 2019 election. In fact, the party of the nationalist president who came to power in 2014, European Solidarity, has only 27 seats in the Ukrainian parliament. By contrast, Zelensky's Servant of the People party has 236 seats in the Ukrainian parliament. So at risk of being glib, it would certainly be fair to say that the Ukrainian nationalist government that came to power after the 2014 revolution did indeed have a high amount of opposition. The article then goes on to state that democracies do not ban elections, but Ukraine has put the democratic process itself on hold since declaring martial law in 2022. So is this true? Do democracies not ban elections during wartime? Well, not entirely, no. The United Kingdom, for instance, went 10 years without an election, from 1935 to 1945, due to the Second World War. I would also note that an estimated minimum of about 4.8 million Ukrainians are currently living as refugees in foreign countries. I'd also note that a little over 15% of Ukrainian territory is still held by the Russian military. The article then goes on to state that democracies do not censor the media, and this, in particular, is almost laughably untrue. In fact, the United States had an Office of Censorship which was active from 1942 to 1945. In the United Kingdom as well, the outbreak of the Second World War was followed by a huge public controversy over the censorship of newspapers, particularly regarding the reporting of the locations of British forces in France. The article also notes the conscription laws on Ukrainian men aged 18 to 60 who are forbidden from leaving the country because they may be called up for military service. So, do democracies do that? Historically, yes. It happened in Vietnam, not with the entire male population of that age, but with people who were drafted or conscripted. They were not legally allowed to leave the country for purposes of fleeing the draft, and many did nonetheless, but that was, it should be noted, a non-existential conflict for the United States. So for Ukraine, the stakes are a lot higher, and it makes sense that the actions, therefore, would be somewhat more extreme. The article also makes note of Ukraine's attempts to ban the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which, as the article notes, has been closely integrated with the Russian Orthodox Church for more than 1,000 years. Now, I would like to note here that the Russian Orthodox Church has been noted and acknowledged as essentially an arm of the government, not only in modern Russia, not only in the Soviet Union, but going all the way back to the Russian Empire. The article also talks about the presence of far-right elements and fascists in Ukraine. Now, the existence of far-right parties and fascists in Ukraine is beyond questioning. They exist in every country. But are they prominent and significant? And for that, we could look at the makeup of the Ukrainian parliament. Ukraine has two politically significant far-right parties. One is Pravy Sektor, or Right Sector, and they have currently 0 seats in parliament. There's also Svoboda, or Liberty, and they currently have 1 seat in parliament. There are also the more moderate but still somewhat nationalist-leaning parties Fatherland and European Solidarity, which have respectively 24 and 27 seats in the parliament. Compare that to neighboring Poland, where the hard-right Law and Justice Party has 161 seats, and the extreme-right Konfederacja Party has 18 seats in a similarly sized parliament. And one more thing that I want to criticize about this article. It states, near the end, the article states that neither Winston Churchill nor Abraham Lincoln ever canceled elections during wartime. And then, direct quote, Churchill actually lost the 1945 British election and had to watch Clement Attlee take the final victory lap for World War II. Now, is this true? Technically, yes, it is, but it is aggressively misleading. The 1945 election in question took place in July of 1945, and the war in Europe ended in May of 1945. So the war that was still going on when this election took place was in East Asia and the Pacific, which I think is generally agreed to be pretty far from Britain. And as I mentioned, it had at that point been 10 years since the last election in the United Kingdom. I think that's all that I have to say about it for now. In summary, it was not a very good article. I would encourage you to read it because there are some things that I didn't touch on, and I definitely didn't cover it, I guess, exhaustively. So read it, take a look. And that sums up this conversation. Thank you for joining me for this discussion about democracy in Ukraine, and I'm hoping that we will be back with something a little bit longer and maybe more substantial soon. This has been a discussion about democracy in Ukraine, and thank you very much for listening.